Hello, everyone, and welcome to website optimizations to boost brand authority. This is the latest webinar with Lumar, and today we are joined by the fabulous Amanda. Welcome, everyone. I would like to offer anyone in the chat, where are you joining from today? We have lots of different time zones. I'm on the West Coast. Amanda, are you on the East Coast, Amanda?
Yep, I'm on the East Coast. I just put in the chat, I'm in Richmond, Virginia, if
Oh,
anyone happens
nice.
to be in the area.
Well, welcome everyone. Someone is joining from outside of St. Louis. Welcome. I think, Amanda, if we pop over to intros and I'll pass to you
Yeah.
to intro.
Oh, Kate's in Lexington, Virginia. Okay, yeah, not too far. I
Oh,
want to get like
nice.
a Virginia marketing thing together at some point. I feel like there's a lot of us here. We're just kind of scattered all around.
That'd be
Um,
cool.
Anyway, yes, thank you all for joining. My name is Amanda. I have been in content marketing, SEO, and brand marketing for about 12 or 13 years now, and mostly been agency side. I've worked at some top agencies like Fractal, and they do a lot of like content marketing and link building work, and I pull rank, which is SEO and content. So I've worked with clients in B2B, B2C, all sizes, and it's been a really great experience to get such a diversity of experience. Um, and along the way, I realized that I kept talking about brand authority. And nobody told me to. It just kept happening because it was so relevant to literally everything we were doing for every client. And so in October, I left my job and started consulting specifically around this concept, which is why I love talking about it. I'm really excited to chat with you all today and hear what you think, um, because I think it's going to be one of the biggest lines of defense we have as SEOs in terms of all the changes that are going on. But we'll get into that in a second. So yeah, I founded Brand Authority Club. It's a Slack group, it's an email newsletter, and it's my consulting business. So you can check that out at brandauthority.club.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Amanda. We're very lucky to have you today. And I believe after we will be doing the chance to reach out and get some mini audits. Is that right?
Yes, yes. At the end, um, I'll share my email, and anybody who's on this webinar or watching it later, I can do a sort of like a mini opportunity audit for your site. So if you shoot me an email, we can get that all set up. Also, shout out to Guyana, one of my very good friends is in the chat right now.
Oh,
That's fun to see
nice.
her.
Welcome, Guyana. Thank you for being here. And I'm hosting today. My name's Rachel. I'm on the professional services team at Lumar. So, yeah, happy to host today. I think after this, Amanda, we just have a couple of bits for me to go through. So, just some housekeeping items for the webinar today. Any questions you have throughout the call, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box, should be in the bottom of the screen. And any feedback you have from today, we are welcome to receiving. There will be a feedback form sent out, I believe. They take less than 1 minute to complete. And then this webinar will be shared in a few days. It'll be sent out via email, and so you'll have it to look back on if you didn't catch it live. Cool. And then just a quick info about closed captions. Enabling closed captions, you're welcome to do so. You can also enable the live transcript, and this webinar is being recorded, so we'll be able to share it and it will have all full subtitles included. So looks like we're going to be covering the impact of brand authority today, also how SEO affects brand authority, how to optimize your site for authority, and then we'll do some questions and answers at the end. So anything you put in the chat, we will try to get to at the end.
Yes, and there's a lot that we could cover here, and I'm going to try to get through it quickly, but that's where the questions are going to be really critical because I'd love to tailor it a little bit more to whatever specific questions you all have or challenges you all have. So definitely throw those in there. We can have some time at the end to focus on those.
Amazing. We do have our first poll question of the webinar, which is, where do you need more help? Is it on-site authority or off-site authority? And there should be a poll going up there for you to vote. So is it on-site or off-site? What would
I'm
you say the
curious.
majority of people would put here, Amanda? What do you think?
My guess would be offsite, but
Off-site?
I'm curious to see how this goes because I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But just because it's like less, to me, it feels less in your control than onsite does.
Yeah, that's very true.
What about you? What is your guess before we see the
I feel
results here?
like there's so much to optimize on site. It might be
Yeah,
that. Um,
it's true.
so
There
we'll
is a lot.
see. Let's see. Oh,
Oh,
so 36% said on site and 64% said off site.
it's not too dramatic of a split though, which is interesting. And yeah,
Yeah.
if if something as we go through this, because we're going to get into both of these in the presentation. Um, Christopher, we were going to get into that. That's what I was just thinking. I'm like, some people might not know the difference, so we're going to get into both of those things. So as we go through, feel free to drop in the chat or in the Q&A, like specifically what about each of these is difficult, because I'd love to get into it.
Cool.
Cool.
Thanks, Amanda. I'll pass over to you.
All right. So let's kind of level set here about the impact of brand authority, why we care about it, why it even matters in terms of SEO, right? I don't think I have to go too deep into this because we're all feeling it. That search it's a lot right now. With AI overviews continuing to impact everything that we're doing, more than a third of all search results get AI overviews, which is just crazy. And the fact that zero-click searching has gotten so prevalent has meant that we are facing challenges that we have never been up against. And I know that this is sort of a refrain that has been repeated, but if anything, it's to commiserate because this is a real I've seen it with many different clients. This is really impacting traffic, and a lot of people don't really know what to do in response to this. In addition to all of that, as we've seen for the last year or two, Reddit and other forums have really been dominating search. And I thought this quote was interesting. The fact that I put it in here is like, oh, SEOs hate to see Reddit and other forums showing up, but searchers like to see them. I'm like, well, sure, but that's not really getting to the underlying problem here. Why do searchers want to see Reddit? Why did they start appending their search terms with Reddit? That's really the issue, and it's because they don't trust anything in search anymore. Uh, and that this could be a whole separate presentation, but part of that is just because of Google favoring gigantic brands over all other brands. Part of it is how many those like affiliate sites and sponsored results were coming up. Not even like paid results, but articles that are sponsored. People just started really losing faith in search, and this was a very recent survey by The Verge and Vox if you didn't get a chance to see it, but 42% of people find that Google searches are less valuable and less useful than they used to be, which is not an insignificant number. So this was like one of the first like hard stats, but anecdotally, a lot of people have been saying this. And I mean, what are we supposed to do as SEOs in light of all this? So to put it all into perspective, when you have this is a scrolling screenshot of a SERP for best pet insurance, uh, and for companies. I don't know what best pet insurance for something. I don't even remember what the rest of the search is, but what you'll see is once it scrolls back up to the top, so you got sponsored, 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 AI overview, and then a Reddit thread, and we're still not to any natural, like, okay, NerdWallet, sure, another tough site to beat, US News and World Report, then Nationwide, which is the first actual brand to appear, okay? So that is so, like, the number of scrolls that were necessary just to get to the first brand in the search results is alarming. It just is. It's tough. And the reason why I'm talking about all this is not to be like, woe is us, this is terrible, but it's to emphasize the fact that if we are going to live in a world where people are really seeking out information and they have to go through more work than ever to find that, we have to make sure we build a brand because people are twice as likely to click on a brand that they know in the SERPs than a brand that they don't. So if we are investing as SEOs also in the fact that people know what our brand is, they understand what we're trying to do, they understand that we are experts, then all the search work gets a little bit easier. And I think that that's a conversation that we need to have as marketers. There's a lot of overlap between these silos that tend to exist at companies. It's like, okay, I got to focus on traffic, I got to focus on click-through rate, search, but we really also need to be thinking about brand. So that's why I started getting really interested in all of this, because it was coming up constantly that not only when Google was like really favoring the big brands, right? Because that was already a signal that they kind of overcorrected there and only went for like the really big names, even though their content wasn't as good as some of the lesser known brands, right? But that was the first indication of, okay, brand is really going to start to matter. And it certainly continues to do so. So that was my little brand authority spiel. And please, if you have any other thoughts or disagree or anything like that, drop it in the chat or Q&A, because I love to sort of debate these things. So if we're all like, okay, brand authority matters, let's talk about how SEO affects brand authority. So we've kind of covered how brand authority can affect SEO. It makes it, increases your chances of conversion, makes it a little bit easier for us. But how can we use SEO to then affect brand authority? So this is where we're going to break it down again by on-site and off-site. So for on-site authority factors, we have content. So again, I'm biased. My background is in content. And one of the things that I look at when I do content audits is the content that we choose to produce and publish is telling a very important story about our company. And when we say you don't even have like a pillar cluster strategy, right? It is still saying something to users and to Google if you are talking about certain topics more than others, if you're writing more in-depth guides about certain things than others. So remembering that content is one of the biggest tools we have to demonstrate authority and to communicate, with the brand positioning that we really want to hammer home. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. Site structure and navigation. I like to say that brand websites are kind of our second best impression. So usually, if somebody hears about a brand on social or search, you can't just make a good first impression. You have to make an amazing second impression. The site itself is going to be really critical in terms of confirming whatever they saw on search or social or wherever else. Like, oh, they land on the site and they think, oh yeah, okay, they do know what they're talking about. Part of that is that when they land on that homepage, it's very clear what you do, what you specialize in, and a lot of that honestly comes from the way the site is structured and the navigation. Just literally the navigation menu can tell a really important story. So I like to emphasize that. And then what's probably the most intuitive are those third-party endorsements, right? So there's a million examples of that, but making sure those are on the homepage and really on any subsequent middle or bottom of the funnel page that you have, so that you're constantly saying like, hey, no, like, believe us, we know what we're doing. Rachel, so just as a caveat to everybody else, I'm not really a technical SEO. Rachel's the technical SEO here. So is there anything else that, things that you might want to add on here that I didn't include that you think are important for the on-site stuff? Because you're right, you mentioned at the top that there's like a million optimizations that could be made here, right?
Yeah, I think credibility and trust go a long way. So making sure like with consistency on your site, making sure that you have, consistent information in terms of like your business. So like when it comes to like local stuff, so you can think about the GMB, making sure everything is consistent across, you have like everything correct in terms of NAP. Just making sure that there's nothing on your site that makes people think, oh, what's that? Is that wrong? And makes them
Mm,
kind of like initially doubt. You just want to be seen as a trustworthy, competent site. So any little downfalls I feel like should be picked up on. And yeah, that's what we try and do with Lumar in terms of like the technical side of it. So
yeah, you made
yeah.
a really good point of like any little mistake. It's like it's sort of like copy editing. I started way back. I was a copy editor in college when I was getting a journalism degree, and it was like it felt thankless because if you did an amazing job, nobody noticed because it's what people expect. And if you messed up one thing, everybody noticed, right? And I feel
Yeah.
like this is sort of that too. It's like if you give somebody a reason not to trust you, that's what they're gonna fixate on.
Yeah, even like a little tiny seed of doubt, you don't want it. Just don't get it
Yeah.
in there.
Yep, absolutely. So, offsite really kind of comes down to two things to really summarize it. Brand mentions, or like mostly organic brand mentions. So, anytime somebody talks about your brand, that signals to Google and to users that you're doing something right. If they're mentioning you without being paid to, it's a genuine endorsement to some extent. And the same with backlinks. We're SEOs, we all know about backlinks, but um, high quality backlinks, and by high quality, that means either the brand or the site you're getting the link from is respected in and of itself, then you're kind of leveraging their authority. If an authoritative site is saying, "Hey, we trust this other site," that means you're probably authoritative. Um, and then also if it's really relevant to your industry, right? If you're getting a link from another site that really specializes in what you're talking about, that also really helps too. Okay, so let's dig a little bit deeper into all those things we just talked about. So the way that you can optimize for each of these elements is basically I kind of put these mini checklists together. And this is where I think if people have specific questions on any of these things, let's go into them. Like drop them in and let's go into them at the end. Starting with on-site authority factors. So uh, I mentioned content clusters, right? I mentioned like topical authority when it comes to content. So when it comes to creating content clusters, as a step back for anybody who's not familiar, the kind of idea around content clusters is that you're making it very clear to search engines, like, hey, here's our pillar posts. That's was one of the terminologies used for it, which is kind of like the top level post about, like, say it's pet insurance, right? It could be, how to find the right pet insurance plan, right? That would be like a pillar post. And then you would have all these subtopics, like maybe it's the best pet insurance, for a specific pet. Maybe it's the best pet insurance, the cheapest, whatever it is. These subtopics that kind of are nested below the primary topic. And it just helps organize things. It helps kind of add a logical hierarchy that means that people who are on your site and search engines don't have to kind of sift through everything and figure out how everything fits together. So, the thing that we have to do to make sure that this is not just earning search traffic, because that's not going to be the entire picture here when it comes to content. We need to make sure that the topics that are represented in our content match what the company, and that's the entire marketing team, right, has decided are the key tenets for the brand. So there's a lot of nuance here. And as people who work in search, we're usually fighting against like really kind of sometimes absurd things that come out of other departments that they want us to try to rank for. But it's a good way to kind of reset and think like, okay, what have I overlooked? Because maybe there wasn't enough search volume for it. But if we are really honing in on this as a brand, we probably do need content on it, and we need that long tail traffic, right? So this number one is kind of a reminder of like, get with all the relevant teams, all the relevant stakeholders, and say, are we representing our brand correctly through our content? Is there anything we're missing? Is there anything we're leaning into too much? And having that kind of be a good start to this journey of creating your next content. The second thing here is talking about after you have that conversation and after you have more ideas of subtopics that you might want to dive into, what are your competitors creating? The reason I ask this is not to copy what they're doing. It's actually to see if there's too much overlap. If you have like 100% overlap with your major competitors, then you're just literally competing apples to apples to try to beat out their content, which you can do, and you're going to have to do that for some things. But it's also good to try to see what other maybe more niche subtopics they're not covering that are of interest to your audience, because that's where you're starting to, that's another way to build authority, right? It's to speak to a problem that really hasn't been addressed by anybody else. That builds immediate trust. So where can you offer unique value? Where on that list that you did in number one, that brainstorm, are your competitors not talking about? Because that brings it higher in the priority list all of a sudden, in that full list that you created. And then finally, seeing if it's even plausible to rank for some of these things. So, the nice thing is the more you niche down in terms of topics, the less difficult it gets to rank for things. But it is still good, even if you decide to create the content for other reasons, to check to see how competitive is that SERP. Like I was just showing, there are some SERPs where it's, even if you rank number one, it might not be worth it, honestly, because it's so far down. And if it's not relevant enough to you, it might not be worth the effort. So these are like the three items I would recommend starting with in terms of before you create or work with a content team, whether you're on one or you work with one, do these items first before you make any major decisions. So then we go into auditing. So that was creating new content, but you have content on your site most likely right now. And a lot of the work, you'll see this on LinkedIn all the time, like people talking, at least it was like very fashionable to talk about this maybe last year, which was like content culling, like deleting a bunch of stuff and weeding out all the weaker stuff, and that it's all valid. I mean, it was popular. People went a little too intense with it and deleted way too much, but there's a reason why that became popular, and it's because of what I was saying, that your content is really your main mechanism for telling the brand story outside of the copywriting done on your site. So what I like to do when I do content audits, as long as they don't have like thousands of pages, which some sites do, but for the ones that don't, I will manually tag every blog post with the topic area that they represent. Now, sometimes that's done by categories. That's the ideal if a blog's already organized by category. But even sometimes I'll re-tag them in the way that I think they should be categorized based on what I've learned about the audience. And if you have it by categories, even better, right? Like if it's already included in the blog. But the reason I do that is to literally look at the numbers. If you're in pet insurance and you have, 10% of your blog posts are about finding pet insurance and 50% of them are about cute dog pictures, that's great. You're probably getting more traffic with the cute dog stuff, but is that where you want to be? That might be driving the most traffic, but it's a conversation you kind of have to have, and it's a good way to get inventory of what's actually happening on the site. And the next step kind of being like, what are the objectives of all of these, and are they meeting those, right? Like maybe you're over-indexing on tangential, and the brand differentiation and positioning is not being communicated well enough, right? So I just recommend a little bit of more manual looking at the numbers here, because I don't think a lot of CMSs are really good at this. Then looking at all those subtopics, all those categories that you have in front of you, and saying like, do we have like a pillar post for any of these? Did we kind of create them off the cuff? Is there a cluster that we built around these? Starting to see, that's a really easy way to look for gaps, because if you have like a one-off post about something and you think it's worth talking about, that means you probably have a lot of accompanying posts you need to create around that topic. So looking at these clusters and seeing if there is a natural hierarchy already, and if there's not, that indicates there's probably an opportunity there to create something else. But if there are clusters there, making sure that the internal links are set up. I think again, like this happens so often where, especially for those of us who don't have big content teams and we're kind of like trying to do everything, um, where we kind of lose track of these clusters and making sure that relevant posts are interlinking. You know, even if you have like a relevant post widget set up or something, is it the right post? Are we linking to enough? Doing like that sort of a mini audit to make sure, and then all those are linking to that pillar page, like that parent page there. So there is, I love doing content audits, but it's a lot of work. But I think it's really, I don't know, Rachel, if you've seen in your experience, but I think it's something that really pays off, and it's interesting because it's not even net new. It's just like it's going through and just cleaning up what's already been done.
Yeah, I would say when I've done this in the past, it even gives like a chance to on category pages, it even gives a chance to like add in some more content there, doesn't it? Like if a client's looking for somewhere to add a bit of content, those category pages can be used as that. And
Yeah.
something I've seen as well is like categorizing them in terms of like search intent is really interesting as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't get to delve into this too much being on the technical side, so it's really interesting, Amanda.
Yeah, the search intent thing too. Like
Mm,
this is a piece of what I do for audits because I'll manually tag. You know, it sounds crazy because everybody's like really into AI, and I'm over here like, yeah, I'm sitting here
yeah.
like manually tagging everything. You can
Yeah.
use AI. You can use AI as the first pass and then clean it up, but it's not great at intent. I've tried. I don't know. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
just not doing the prompts well enough, but I'll do the categories, then I'll do the at least like the stage of the customer journey. Not even
Yeah.
necessarily like intent, but the stage of the customer journey, because that's also a place where you can see the gaps. If it's like kind of like what I was saying, if you have too much top of the funnel, too much early in the journey stuff, and like nothing for middle of the funnel, that's a big opportunity. So there are so many things that you can kind of go through and uh, tag those specific criteria on. But that it's a great point. The intent is, you know, when you think about those categories, it shouldn't just be like literally the topic. It's sort of like who are we trying to talk to with each of these categories? You know, like
Yeah.
it's certainly something to add in.
Yeah. And then when you like dive deeper into it, it's like which ones are then becoming more successful, like in terms of conversions. And then you can like, yeah, it's interesting. You can go back and look.
Yeah, I love it. It's fun. Also because, like I said, it's tough to invest the time if you're internal into doing this. Like sometimes it's hard to get the buy-in to be like, hey, give me a week to do an audit. You're like, no, just create more stuff. We need more traffic, you know. But anyway, so that's content. Drop any questions if you have them on content. But for moving on to the site structure and the navigation, there's a lot that we can talk about here. Rachel, you probably have more stuff too. But the basics here, reviewing your top line nav. So it's so funny. As an aside, I'm working on like I'm looking at a bunch of hero sections of SaaS companies, and it's so funny how often that the top line navigation is so generic that I still can't even figure out exactly what they do based on the hero section and the nav, you know? It's just which is fine, but you have to kind of look at the top line nav and be like, if somebody has a question, they know which item on the nav to roll over to see the sub navigation, right? Like that, it kind of alludes to number three, which I think is the most important thing here, which is you're sort of pretending to be somebody who's never heard of your brand before landing on the site and seeing how long it takes for people to navigate to information that they're looking for. Uh, so kind of you could almost do this after the content exercise, right? Where you're like, here are the different intents that we're trying to speak to on our site. Here are the different questions, like the frequently asked questions that they have. So write that list of questions down, land on the homepage and say, would I be able to figure it out where to find this information? And how many clicks does it take? Because that's extremely important. Nobody's going to sit here and 7 click their way through to figuring out what, what you offer and if it's for them. So really the summary of this slide is like, okay, look at your top line nav. Is it very clear how, all the subcategories, like people could guess what subcategories would be under each of those top line navs. But the secondary navigation, you want to make sure you're speaking to, especially for like B2B, that you're speaking to specific audiences or use cases, because that speaks to, okay, if I'm somebody on the site, I want to figure out very quickly if this applies to me. So that might be a 3-click situation or a 2-click situation. And consolidating as much as you can, just to make sure that you're speaking to the right people, but also not sitting there with like 50 different options and, overwhelming anybody. And just doing that exercise of like, okay, we're going to write down a list of intents across the customer journey and the questions that are typically asked by the people in those different stages. And you've probably done this already for, any other, for keyword research, right? So take that same list and go through your site and be like, how many clicks did it take me to find this? And if it's more than 4, you might want to consider, why is this 4 clicks deep? Is this something that's important enough that it should be easier to find? Is there anything, Rachel, anything else related to like site structure that you want to throw in here?
I think because our main goal really, isn't it? It's to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for users and bots to access all of the links within that navigation. So for me, like I think what I look to from a technical side is within that, are we running into any 404s? Are there any broken links in that nav? Are there any redirects in that nav that could potentially be wasting a bit of crawl budget? But yeah, I think ultimately it's like we want to make it as simple as possible, don't we? And it's not like we're not going to take 7 clicks to get to a product and finally get to that sales page. We want to make it as streamlined as possible.
It's a great point. And it goes back to what we were saying, right? If somebody runs into something where they click on something in the sub navigation and it's a 404, they're going to be like, the hell is this? They're going to
Yeah,
leave,
and again, that kind of like leads back to like, oh, is that like a little bit of trust loss there? Like this isn't working. What's going on? You know.
Yeah, for sure. Totally agree. And I'll do this part quickly because I know we're short, like tight on time. Third-party authority signals. I think the most standard ones: testimonials, reviews, ratings, any sort of third-party confirmation of like prior customers or clients who can say outright they are great. So you'll see on any page you look at that's doing this right, you'll always see testimonials on the homepage. You'll always see them on mid to bottom of the funnel pages, right? And if it's e-commerce, you'll see ratings plastered everywhere. You'll see it, you know, and it makes sense because they're trying to, at every scroll, even on the page, they're trying to say like, hey, remember, like we've done this before. Um, if you don't have that stuff, if you're like, listen, I've been agency side for many years. It was a pain to get case studies from our clients because a lot of people didn't want to talk publicly, and we'd have to do it anonymously, and it just wasn't as impactful. So like, I get it. Still high priority, still try to get it done. But if you need to supplement it with other stuff, see if there's any other statistics that you can include. The number of clients that you've had, the number of money you've generated for those clients, the number of customers you've served, like anything, and you have that information, right? Like that's all in your control. So is there another type of authority signal? Number of years you've been around. You see that used for brick and mortar company, brands too. So it doesn't always have to be third party. You're still kind of leveraging the work with the customers and the clients, so by citing those types of statistics. And then press coverage, I think, is also not like, if you have it, you're going to want to put it on your site. Although not everybody does that. But if you have been picked up, if your brand has been talked about organically, we're going to talk about offsite in a second. If you achieve any of those things, you want to make sure that the logos are on your site, and that you're saying. And actually, this applies to client logos too. Even if you can't if you haven't gotten the chance to do like get a testimonial from them or a full case study, if they approve just putting their logo on your site, you'll see that all the time too. Because if you look and you see, 15 logos of brands you've heard of, you're like, oh, okay, clearly they're doing something fairly well. So these are just ideas, but all of these count as those authorities. When you hear the term authority signal, that's basically what it's referring to. You also will hear that in reference to like social stats. Like if you have like so many followers on Instagram, that sends an authority signal, right? If you have 12, followers on Instagram, they're like, okay. There's a lot of different ways that you can build that sort of authority, and it's making sure that whatever you currently have is very visible, that people will see it, even like especially around the CTAs, like right above the fold, around any CTAs, you're gonna want this stuff presented. Okay. Offsite. And this is why, the reason why for the poll I said that this might be voted on the most is because, like I said, it's not fully in our control. And that's frustrating to people like me who are control freaks. So I'm going to talk about, again, mini checklists for how to handle this sort of thing. And the first part of it is creating content, because, and again, this could be my bias, but I think especially now, it is the best way to get great organic mentions and links. So what kind of content does that? The I won't say easiest, because I know an internal data collection is not always easy. I know that I've worked with companies where they're like, yeah, we want to do this, but it's going to take us 3 months to work with the corresponding teams and clean it up. And I'm like, that's great. Just get it in progress, because internal data and analyzing it in interesting ways is one of the best things you can do for building authority. Not only because you're presenting a report or a study or a survey of your customers or whatever it is, which already shows that you're putting effort into understanding your industry more, but it is much more likely to get picked up by other publications and other blogs if you give them something new to say. Like, you see how I included that Vox and Verge statistic in this presentation? It's because that was speaking to something. They probably did that survey and study because they knew there were a lot of questions around trust in Google. And instead of talking anecdotally, instead of saying like, I think XYZ, if you can give somebody a statistic about XYZ that they're trying to say, they're going to love that, and they're going to cite that, and they're going to use that. So if you have the opportunity to use internal data, it's number one. Get it moving, even if you can't get it done first. After that, and that's like more kind of like, it will lead to some, in some cases, passive link building if it's ranking for relevant things. But you can also build create resources or tools or calculators. That's why you see so many people have calculators now. It's almost like a almost overdone thing, but because when people are doing their keyword research and they see that there's enough search volume for that kind of stuff, those are the types of things that get passive link building over time, meaning you're not pitching people. You're not like sending out a bunch of cold emails saying, hey, you would love this blog post I wrote. It's because it ranks, people link to it because it's useful. And the same thing goes for lists of statistics. You'll see that all the time. And, I sort of hate those, even though I know they work. I think they're much better if you can use your own data on them rather than consolidating data from all over the place. But you're trying to think of like, what can you provide that would be something that people would source and cite or share with people and be like, wow, that calculator was amazing. Or that article is going to say, hey, we're talking all about, mortgages. Here's a calculator you can use. Thinking about it that way. But also if they're aligned with your brand, all the better, because now you're building authority around certain useful resources that tie back to your mission. For getting mentions and links, if you're the type of brand that has like a person who is the face of it, that's not going to be all brands, obviously, but if you are, then pitching for podcasts or going on webinars or doing that sort of work can also get more exposure, especially for more niche industries. You're going to have a lot of opportunities to tap into those niche audiences because communities are getting much more not just popular, but influential. Like that's where people are going for information. So if you can get into these communities, if you can talk, have conversations with these folks, that can be really powerful for building more brand mentions. And then this last bullet could be a whole separate presentation, but thinking about if you're a brand, especially if you don't have a lot of authority right now, thinking about like your brand friends, meaning not competitors, but brands that kind of are in your space and have a similar ethos to you, maybe that you can partner with for a study or a campaign. And if they will share it with you, like offer to do the heavy lifting and offer to just put their name on it so that they'll promote it. And again, you're kind of tapping into their authority by them being involved at all. So thinking about like who might those other brands be in our space. Like I did when I was at Stacker, which is a newswire that was good for building links and stuff. We partnered with a technical SEO company and a content company, and we were talking about links, and we did a whole report covering all the different aspects of SEO, and none of us were competitors. So it was a good way for all three of our brands to get to the audiences of the other three, all of which caring about SEO in some capacity, right? So just trying to think that way is a good opportunity, especially if you're just starting out. Then you have to, in some of these cases, pitch, and it's tough out there. But here are the brief things that I've learned along the way. When you're coming up with a list of who to pitch some of the stuff, like if you do create that report, if you're doing like a yearly or an annual report and you're like, this is amazing, it uses internal data, the insights are incredible, we got to get coverage for this, you will want to pitch it even if it does get naturally picked up later. But the pitching is going to give it more momentum, and you're going to want to get as much out of this as you can. So when you're looking for who to pitch, make sure that they're publishing multiple times a week, maybe once a week. But think of it this way, statistically, you're more likely to get covered by a writer who has a lot they need to produce rather than they're sitting there producing one thing a month and they probably already have that scheduled out for the next 6 months. So the people that have a lot of deadlines to hit, those are the people that you want to reach out to. Make sure that they already talk about external content or surveys. Make sure it's not like an opinion section. Make sure that it's the type of the writer that is writing this type of thing that would make sense for you to be cited in. Ideally, the domain authority or the domain rating or whichever metric of choice is like about the same or higher, or if it's lower, that it's really relevant. It's okay if it's lower, particularly if it's very relevant to your industry. And I think when we used to run these surveys at Fractal, one of the biggest things that people said was that writers, they would survey publishers, and these writers would be like, they're pitching me, but I don't cover this. Like, it's not my beat. A lot of writers have very specific beats. And by beat, I mean they have like their own subcategory that they write about exclusively. So you really have to, like, you're going to waste a lot of time if you don't identify what these writers are covering. So those are like, if you're going to put a pitch list together, those are 4 things to make sure to keep in mind. When it comes to the actual email that you're crafting, the subject line and the intro should have personalization if possible. So if you're able to find out something from a writer's Blue Sky or their LinkedIn or something that you have in common, that's great. If there's something in their previous work that stands out, that's great. But even then, like, a lot of people do that, so it's getting harder, like I said. So if you can't do any of that, then like pique curiosity. An example of that that Stacker had, they did a news story. A lot of these same tenets apply to headlines or the titles of their content. The titles of your content and subject lines have a lot of the same advice, which is piquing curiosity. And theirs was, I'm from South Florida, and theirs was, here are the most humid cities in America, and no, number 1 is not in Florida. And I was like, oh, hell no, because South Florida is the most humid place on this earth, and I need to now see what cities beat out, South Florida. So they piqued my curiosity. They didn't tell me what the answer was, but they got me to click in and see, get that satisfaction of seeing my own preconceived notions challenged. So you want to think that way with your subject lines. You want the writer to be like, that's an interesting hook. They might use it in their headline too. Once you've done all that and you have whatever personalization you can manage, you just want a short description, short, of why their audience would care about what they're pitching. That's what you're not talking to the writer, you're talking to the writer's audience. Because the writer just wants to get a lot of views and shares and engagement on their story. So if you can succinctly say, hey, I think that your audience would really like this because when you did this other piece that's a very similar topic 6 months ago, it got, thousands of shares, and I think this is a great follow-up. Whatever it is, that's the hook you're trying to explain. And then link to the content. There are different strategies here. Some people like to kind of bait them into replying. I think it's better to just give them the link and say, here's what it is. Like, do you want to cover this? Make it as easy as possible. Don't add a step, essentially. And then quickly, LLMs are obviously the hot topic, and not everybody really has an answer to this. And Rachel, I'm curious if you have thoughts on this. Um, because there is no 100% answer. There's just like a lot of people studying it right now and running tests, and it's really interesting to see what they're saying. Lily Ray the other day pointed out, and I've actually seen this myself, that if you're searching for somebody in ChatGPT, like a name, they're pulling from LinkedIn and other social sites to get a sense of their expertise and their opinions. Like I did it for my name, and it pulled everything from my LinkedIn that I've posted about and said like, she cares about XYZ. And I was like, oh, weird. Like it's literally all from my LinkedIn page. So in any cases where you need to optimize around a person, definitely make sure that they're posting reasonably substantial stuff on social. Also, the second one's almost just like a strategy suggestion, which is everyone's sort of obsessed with appearing in LLMs, but they're not really thinking about the types of queries that they want to be the results for. And they're not necessarily the same structure or the same intent as search. There is overlap, but there are going to be other circumstances where people will be using LLMs. And so it's like a good thought exercise to go through and write out what those might be, and then make sure you have content that matches those answers. Um, and then incorporating schema markup. This kind of fell off a little bit because Google stopped featuring those snippets as much in search results, but there has been some, I don't want to, evidence is a strong word, but there has been some suggestions that it still really helps LLMs understand the content on your site, which increases the chances of it being used in LLMs. So it's never going to hurt. It's like an extra step, but it still helps search engines and LLMs still like parse through everything that's going on your site. I just talked a lot, but
Thanks, Amanda.
after all of that, it's sort of like, what is the biggest thing that's your blocker right now? Is this poll? And I think that I'd be curious to see, yeah, the putting in the chat. Other things that I can think of are like buy-in, getting buy-in for this type of stuff, or having the resources / budget for this kind of stuff. What is getting in the way?
I think just quickly going back to that as well, Amanda, with the LLMs, it's more of like a conversational kind of style as well, isn't it, when you speak to them? And
Hmm.
sometimes when you think about that, how can you incorporate in that in content so it gets picked up? That was what I was thinking around it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. Oh, Brooke in the chat. Yeah, resources, budget, right. But it's interesting that you say expertise, because that's really relatable as a marketer, that if it's a situation in which you personally don't have the information that you need to sound like an expert, wrangling the internal experts to contribute
Yeah,
to that stuff is its own job.
it's
So
not
that is so
easy.
valid. Capacity to pull together various necessary stakeholders yet to get consensus. Having a good overall plan rather than capture Jack Sparrow, I guess.
That's great.
Yeah, that's all super valid. And I didn't really get into this in this presentation, but that's part of why I really love the concept of brand authority and why I'm like on this one woman mission to make people care about it, because I think it could be a really good way to break down some of those silos, like across stakeholders of different departments. Because if we start treating that more seriously, like a metric people can start caring about, every department is impacted by it. There is no marketing sub department or specialty that would have nothing to do with authority.
Yeah,
Everything touches authority. So
that's so true.
hopefully over time we can get people there and start making this case. It's just tough because it's a little more nebulous than, search traffic is in terms of a
Yeah.
metric.
Oh, very mixed results from the poll. 42% was other. So 42%
Yeah.
was what we were discussing in chat. Also looks like we had 17% of people vote for prompt engineering, 25% critical thinking, 17% data analysis, zero people voted for coding. So that's interesting.
Yeah, those are all more technical, right? And that it sort of would
Yeah.
depend on what you're doing, if coding would even come in, right? If you're like building certain pieces of content, or if you're working, like you said, on the technical aspects of a site, maybe that would come
Mm,
in.
yeah.
But I definitely think that budget and buy-in are two of the biggest obstacles. But that's why we need to keep telling the story, and it's why I started with that beginning section. If you can paint that picture internally, and unfortunately, as SEOs, we're like constantly having to not just educate once, because Google's constantly changing things up on us. So we're
Yeah.
like having to re-educate over and over and over again to our leadership in a way that I don't think anybody else in marketing has to do. There's
Yeah.
just not
It's
as
very
much
much like
change.
we have to try and keep up. And it's like every day, it's like we're keeping up and there's changes left, right, and center. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Fun times.
What an industry to work in, especially right now.
Yeah.
So the last poll is, would you like a demo of Lumar's website optimization platform? We have some responses here. If you are seeing, anything that could be hindering to your brand authority on your website, Lumar has multiple tools that we can use to diagnose and find issues. So definitely let us know if you'd like a demo. We will definitely do that. And that poll's just there. Um, as we spoke about identifying like in the main navigation, any issues with that. Sometimes we found that we've been able to identify issues with crawlers actually crawling links in header navs and things like that, broken links, any redirects. We also have like schema reports that we can look at. So all good stuff. And that was for those demos.
Awesome.
So let's see. We had some questions. Let's see. What do you think, Amanda? Which one would you like to go for first?
All right. I'll just go in order. So Tristan had a couple questions. How would you recommend a brand approach a PR team to engage with brand authority activities? How would you sell it to them as an opportunity? Um, Internal PR team? Just want to clarify that. If you're talking about like a brand team going to an internal PR team, totally, you know, yes, please, internal. Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure. Um, it's a great question because they don't tend to care about some of the same things that like SEOs care about or the same things that brand cares about, right? Sometimes they do, and I think it's leveraging that Venn diagram overlap, which is if you're able to kind of create that uh, the content that I've mentioned, like the internal data or what have you, you're basically sort of pitching it as giving them more fodder to send out. It's like, hey, sort of like and I don't know, I worked sort of alongside digital PR, not as much in traditional PR, but from the digital PR side, it can be tough to continuously get coverage if nothing new is happening at the company. Like if you don't have some flashy new product or like an acquisition or a new leadership level hire, it's tougher for the PR team to just be out there coming up with stuff. So pitching it like, hey, we'd love to partner with you on this research report that we want to put together because we think it'll really help us get some coverage on like this level of site. But also to your question, having a conversation with the PR team before you even start anything, because they're probably going to have gaps where, it can be like a little dicey if you're like, we're coming in and we're doing this, whether the PR team likes it or not, and we're going to pitch it ourselves and it's going to, it can get a little tense. So instead, like having a conversation with them first and being like, hey, for SEO reasons or for brand reasons, we're trying to create this type of content. But we also want to know, where have you struggled? Like, where have you been trying to pitch and you haven't been able to get interest? Like, can we support that by creating, branded content? So making it collaborative from the beginning, because I have seen like it is a delicate balance between departments, and you don't want people to think that you're taking over what they're doing or telling them how to do their jobs. You're really trying to figure out how you can supplement what they're doing and have like a joint departmental win. So I think it's critical to just involve them at the beginning and see what opportunities they see, and then you're just helping them at that point. Great question. With
Should we
these,
move to, just in the interest of
yeah.
time, we had a question from Brooke. We see a good amount of traffic with our blog content, but need to prioritize our service pages on our website. What can you do to optimize those if we've already added testimonials, information on our expertise, like years in business or credentials on the team, etc.?
Yeah, so that's just overall thinking like how you can optimize your service pages. Um, I would make sure, and it's hard to say without seeing them, but I would make sure that you have, this goes back to making sure like the user intent and the specific audiences are served. Because I think one of the things I'm seeing these days, because search is so competitive, is the results are bringing up like for very specific audiences. If your services are speaking, like if you have sub pages for those very specific audiences. So if you have like a general service page, but then you have case studies or sub pages that are like, yeah, sure, we do that, but we do it specifically for, people in these jobs, these jobs, these jobs, these jobs, and these jobs. Now you're really honing in on making people like see themselves in those services pages. So that's one suggestion. I don't know if you already do that, but um, doing the kind of analysis I talked about earlier too, of like making sure they find those pages really easily, and that the interlinking is solid between those services pages and all the relevant blog traffic that you're building. Because if those blog pages are doing really well, you want to make sure they're linking up to the relevant service pages um, as well. So those are just a
Yeah,
couple things off the top of my head, but that could be part of the mini audit if you email me, Brooke. So shoot me an email.
nice. Right. Do we have time for one more, or shall we move on? Any
I
questions that?
can
Oh, go
I'll
ahead,
just
Amanda.
quickly, for, is PR syndication good for SEO for e-commerce businesses? Yes and no. It's not going to be good from a link perspective 9 times out of 10. Um, if you just send out like a press release, but it's great for awareness. So it's not like it's good from a brand mention perspective and a brand awareness perspective, but for like SEO, if you're really trying to move the site authority needle, it's not going to be as effective. So I think it's good to do if you have the right expectations for it and you know what it's good for. I just don't want to. I want you to have really high expectations and then be like, oh, our domain authority didn't go up or something like that.
Nice.
Um, these are all really great questions, and I know we didn't get to them all. So I just quickly, Rachel, I'm sorry, I'm like just
All good.
rolling through. Um, I'm happy to answer your questions and do like a free mini authority audit. That's my email. It's amanda@brandauthority.club. And the website is brandauthority.club. So if you reach out to me there or on LinkedIn, I'm chronically on LinkedIn, it's a problem. If you reach out to me on any of those places, I'd be happy to chat with you a bit more about this, because obviously I can talk forever. So uh, thank
Thanks,
you.
Amanda. That's fantastic and a great opportunity there for a free mini audit. We also have with Lumar, we have our podcast. The next episode looks like SEO friendly rendering with Chris Span. And yeah, join us for our next webinar, which will be e-commerce SEO, preparing for your peak season success, and that looks like it's with Lumar's Patrick Horridge and also Lumar's Richard Barrett. So that'll be a great one to join, 23rd of April. And yeah, I think thank you so much, Amanda. This has been so interesting.
Oh, I'm glad. Sometimes, like I said, I can just talk and talk, and I
No, it's
just
been
want to make sure it's
wonderful.
useful.
Thank you so much, and we can't wait to have you on the next Lumar webinar.
Yeah, y'all are awesome. I love doing this and partnering with you all. And thank you so much, everyone, for your time and your really great questions. Um, we're all in this together. I know it's tough out
Yes.
there right now. Yeah,
Yes, we're all
I know it's
chronically on
tough.
LinkedIn, Amanda, don't worry.
Yeah, add me on LinkedIn, y'all. I'll be there.
Thanks,
Uh,
everyone.
Take care.
Bye.